Just a little bit about Comcast. We are a big global media and technology company. We really have kind of three big businesses. The Comcast that we kind of know, everybody kind of associates with the traditional, video, voice, broadband systems. We have the Glamour properties under NBC Universal, and it is really, really cool to be associated with those brands, right? I mean, like cable versus DreamWorks, right? Like where you want to be. So I was just at the DreamWorks studio in LA. We did a cloud summit, and I posed next to the showcases with all the Oscars and stuff in it, and that's pretty cool. That doesn't happen with the cable side of the business. And then we recently, newest member of our family is Sky. I work on the left-hand side, the Comcast. So my team is responsible for cybersecurity for the kind of thin corporate functions that sit across, and then the vertical, the Comcast vertical. So we have about 30 million customer relationships, about 1 million miles of network, hundreds of millions of devices in our customers' homes, lots and lots of digital properties. So we really do take our customers' security very seriously, and the security of our enterprise. And my team works really hard, and we try our best. And we're always trying out new things and always trying to improve. Security is one of those things, it's not a destination, right? It's a journey. You're always kind of working. So what I want to share with you today is our journey for the past couple of years of building security in. So as we develop our products, we're trying to make sure that those products and services are secure from the minute that they are released. And then also kind of the road ahead, right? Because we are not where we need to be. We've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go, right? So just wanted to talk about that. So the terminology that is being used is DevSecOps, right, for this type of work where you try to build security in. And so our definition of DevSecOps is empowered engineering teams that are taking ownership of how their product performs in production, including the security of that product, right? So if you think about it, there's been kind of this movement in software development, right? When I started a very, very long time ago, we did waterfall. We got requirements, we coded them, we kind of threw them over the wall to the test team. Jennifer did a talk right before mine on QA, Tales from QA, I forget that, but it was, talked about modern way that teams work, right? But we started with that waterfall. It was kind of throw it over the wall to the testers. And about late 1900s, right, early 2000s, the agile movement started. And one of the biggest things it did was it broke down that wall between developers and testers and product management, right? And then about 10 years later, the DevOps movement kind of started. The defining book is Phoenix Project, right? How many of you have read that book? A lot of you. And that was the start of DevOps, and that started breaking down the wall between agile teams and operations teams, right? I was at Intel when that movement started, and we had, Jazz Humble come and visit us, and, when we started the whole DevOps program there, he actually advised us, which was, pretty amazing. And then we did, about 5 years after that, about mid 2015-ish or so, this new terminology started coming up, DevSecOps, and that's that last barrier, right, that we still have. We have DevOps teams that are developing, testing, and operating their products and services, and then we have the security group kind of sitting on the side and being kind of, a gate or a scold, right? It's like, oh my gosh, how could you do that, right? Or you can't do that until we do this, right? And that's not how we want to work. We want to be part of the development process. There are not enough security engineers around, so we want our developers to really build security in. So that's what DevSecOps means to us, is breaking down the barrier between agile teams, between DevOps teams, and between security, right? So what do security practices look like on a DevOps continuum? First of all, if you just look at the continuum, we still have all the activities we used to do in the waterfall days, right? We still do planning, we still develop and code and build and test and validate and release and deploy, and then we monitor, and if things start not working, we fix them and we learn from that and we repeat the cycle. What's happening with DevOps and DevSecOps is that cycle is getting shorter and shorter, right? So we have teams at Comcast that release multiple times a day, thousands of times a year, right? So between that whole cycle is going faster and faster. So how do you add security to this? And what are those security practices? So there are practices that are more suitable for certain activities in the development cycle, but some activities you can do any time. So threat modeling is one of them. We like to do that as early in the product, inception phase when you're thinking about the product, but you can really do it on a deployed product as well, right? So it's one of our most widely adopted practices. Static and dynamic analysis. How many of you do static and dynamic analysis? A lot of you. That is awesome. And then the new stuff, right, with IASD, which is kind of combining the best of both static and dynamic. Building the code, testing security features, doing actual pen testing and fuzz testing. Fuzzing is just basically sending unformatted, unexpected input to any surface that accepts the input, right? So that could be a pipe, a port, a actual UI, it could be anything that accepts an input, right? And it's basically just generates random noise that is fed to those inputs, and you see how does your system react to that, right? So, and then all the way from everything that you have to do once that system is in operation to support it from a security point of view, right? One of the biggest things that we find is we'll have a deployed system, and the security team could be blind to that deployed system, right? So there are no logs being collected. There is no there's no way to monitor that from a security point of view in operations, right? So those are the kind of things that you want to start thinking about as you're building the product. Not just is my code secure, but how will I operate it in a secure way? And this, by the way, happens mostly from acquisition, right? When you acquire a product that you're deploying in your environment, and you suddenly find, okay, how do I as a security team now know that this product is behaving well from a security point of view? So if I put all of this together and I go to a development team as a security team and say, hey, we're going to do this cool new thing called DevSecOps, and this is what you have to do, guess what they're going to do? Right, like run screaming. So the hard part is, how do you take all of this, because ultimately we want to be doing all of this, and do it in a way that is incremental and acceptable. So one of the principles that we really follow is this whole principle of inspect and adapt, right? Which is basically says that we're going to introduce things in small chunks. We're going to watch how they work. And then we're going to inspect, and then we're going to adapt, right? So what I'm going to present to you is our framework for doing this. And this has been really an inspect and adapt framework. So it looks very cool now, there's 7 steps, but it took us, it wasn't like, a bunch of us got in a room and then came up with this, right? It started out kind of half-baked, and we got a lot of input, we rolled it out, and this has been over about 2.5 years that these are our 7 core steps now that we do. 6 months from now, this will probably be different, because we are constantly changing based on the lessons that we learned. So here are 7 principles, parts of the framework, and I'll talk about all of them. So first is, we really had to define some principles. How many of you here are familiar with the Agile Manifesto? Every single one, right? That's what I expected. And what's cool about the manifesto is you may not know all of the details, and you may not need to know all of the details, but if those principles are well understood and embraced, then a lot of the decisions that you make will be the right decisions anyway, right? Because you kind of go, yeah, code is more important than document. Both are important, but code is more important, right? And you'll kind of know what decision to make when those choices come up. So we really focused on defining principles, and we worked very, very closely with our development teams to do this. Executive sponsorship, this takes time, because when you are introducing all of those practices in your development cycle, guess what happens? Things will initially slow down, right? Your velocity is impacted. And so you have to get ownership and agreement from all parts of the org that, yes, we're going to do this. And initially, we'll slow down to go fast, right? Because eventually, you'll go fast, because at the end of it all, our goal is that we're not being overwhelmed by security vulnerabilities that the team has to fix anyway, right? So the whole purpose of all this is to get ahead of all that. So we want to define a secure development lifecycle. We want to define a maturity model, and I'll talk about why. Community building is super important. The security team provides great amount of support. And then we have this whole concept of craftsmanship, where we want our developers to actually build security capabilities. So how many of you are familiar with open source security projects, right? Like the one Netflix runs with SecurityMonkey for cloud security. Some of you. That is what my team is now doing, right? We're really engaging with open source projects, not just my team, but all of Comcast, open source security projects, and not just using them, but contributing to them, right? So that's the craftsmanship part. So I'm going to start with our principles. And I'm going to just build this out. And so here are our principles. And just like the Agile Manifesto, both parts are important, but when given the choice, we always focus more on the first part than the second part, right? So first is we want to build security in more than bolt it on, which means that, traditionally security first gets involved when the product is built, right? You do a test. And and then you're just the bad guy, because you're like, you can't release this because it's got vulnerabilities in it, right? So instead of that, that's bolting it on. We want to make sure that by the time we do that test, everything just passes, right? We want to rely on empowered teams instead of security specialists. So we need security specialists. I have cryptographers and blockchain experts on my team, and that kind of knowledge is very specialized, and it's not scattered throughout the org. But the day-to-day work as you're writing code, being aware of buffer overflows and SQL injection and all of those kind of things, making sure your ports are properly configured as you deploy, those kind of things we want our teams to do. We want to rely more on continuous learning than end-of-phase gates. We want security out of the blessing process. If you're doing everything right, your product should be ready to release, right, instead of a gate. And then finally, we want to focus more on culture change than policy enforcement. So our big goal is policy as code. So developers, I was a developer most of my life, we don't like to read policy documents. We had, and we still do, because you need policies to be compliant and all of that, but developers would rather use an API or a library or a microservice or a tool, and just by using that be compliant, right? Instead of read a 100-page document and then try to figure out how do I become compliant with it. So our goal is what we call tweet level policies. Really, our top level policies are like 140 characters or less. And then below that, we'll have standards and guidelines and patterns and APIs and microservices and whatever we build below that can be used by our developers. So that was for the principles. The second is our SDL, the Secure Development Lifecycle. So the way we do this is very, very agile. We don't do big, multi-week assessments and all of this, right? We actually have somebody from my team sit down with the development team, and we do a facilitated self-assessment against a maturity model, and I'll show you the model in a minute, right? So we talk about, and it's a 2-hour session. The team's in the room with security people, and we first talk about, here are the practices that are important. Let's talk about which ones of these you want to adopt because they make sense in your environment, right? Because they will address your risk, or or your programming language, or your particular database, or your particular way of releasing your product, right? And what happens is the teams are actually harder at assessing themselves than we would ever be, right? So because people worry that people will just kind of if you do self-assessments, and then based on that, the team comes up with 1 or 2 things. That is our recommendation. Pick 1 or 2 things that in the next quarter you're going to implement. In whatever stage you're in, we're not requiring you to be in a CI/CD environment, right? Although it's so much easier if you are in a CI/CD pipeline to just introduce these things. But if you're not, we meet you where you are, right? And a quarter later, we go back and we do another self-assessment. And I'll show you results in a second, right? Now, if it's a program that has like 10 or more teams working on it, multiple teams working on it, then we may do the things down below, right? We may do a session that shows this is what the practices are and why they're important, and then a joint session, and then do separate sessions for the self-assessments, right? And basically what we do is just repeat the cycle quarterly. Now, here is our maturity model. It does not look like maturity models that you have probably seen in the past. We have what we call our Nifty 9 practices or domains. We started with our Super 6, and now we're with the Nifty 9. And this may be a little hard to read, so I'll just walk through it. Each segment represents a particular area. So one of our segments says a second set of eyes, right? And what that is saying is that a recommended practice is a security peer review of your code or your design, and or a static analysis or dynamic analysis or IAST, right? And then I'll just keep moving. We have a awareness and training. We have some fundamental training that every technologist in Comcast goes through, and then we have higher levels of training. Architecture and design. There may be something around vulnerability management, configurations. So those are the kind of slices. By the way, I think these slides will be available. I'm not sure. But you can always send me an email and I can send you the slides, right? So so that's the segments. And then the way the teams rate themselves is starting from don't know, we've never been assessed, to we're thinking about doing this practice, to we've actually started making plans, to we have actions in place, to culture. Culture means this is BAU. We just do this, right? And we deliberately picked shades of gray to do this because one of the feedback we got from the teams was, my gosh, when we do that initial assessment and the whole thing is red, it's really very daunting. So somehow shades of gray was better than red, green, and blue. But this is the kind of stuff you learn, right? Which is important. So what I'm showing you here is an example. This would be a product line with 3 teams. How do I know there are 3 teams? Because there are 3 circles inside the, each team has a circle. And then each circle is colored by one of these. And again, the team does that self-assessment, right? And then we go back. And a quarter later, we'll do it again. And by the way, we've put tooling in place, so all of this rolls up, right, automatically. The next thing I talked about was the community. We have a security guild, which is very active. It has representation from all parts of Comcast. And the guild does things like, they'll take on projects. One issue we had was secrets management. How many of you struggle with secret management? Managing your keys, managing your, and what do you do? How, check it into GitHub, or, it's in a script somewhere, right? Plain text. And if your system ever gets compromised, God forbid, the keys to your kingdom are right there, right? Exposed. So secrets management was an issue that our community was struggling with, right? We would do security testing and we would say, your keys are out in the open, do something about this. And they would go, what? What do you want me to do? So one of the things that we did was come together and create a secrets as a service platform, right? That is an API that just lets people manage the keys, right? So that's the kind of stuff that happens when you build a community. The next part I talked about was training. So we have this, by the way, we borrowed from Cisco. I'm not going to take credit for this. Chris Romero at Cisco really started this whole kind of belt training system. And it's kind of based on martial arts. So you start with the basic yellow belt, which is required for everybody in our technology organization. And then after that, we have specific journeys. So if you're a developer, you have a security journey that you'd go through, with a green belt. If you're a network engineer, if you're a system administrator or a database administrator, right? If those are the 4 journeys we have today. And of course, we'll be growing this. So yellow and green belt are in place today. We've just started to think about what will brown and black belt look like. And black belt will be super elite. We're thinking in our 10,000 people, we may have, 40 who are black belts, right, in this area. Craftsmanship, so these are the things that we've done for, we really want the right thing to do to become the easy thing to do. So my team is now writing more and more code and less policy, like I said earlier. So, Autobahn is our service that lets you manage jump servers. Secrets as a service I already talked about. Security Monkey we're using from Netflix and for our public clouds, GCP and AWS, and we're enhancing it, and we're going to start contributing back to the community. We have reverse proxy. We work with Amazon to create a product called Raptor that does AWS monitoring, security monitoring. Quest 365 is our index search. We do have a full platform built for our security, log ingest, data lake, a Kafka environment, right, that does a full processing and analysis of our security data. Oh, by the way, GitHub. How often do people, by mistake, type in the public GitHub instead of their enterprise GitHub? And you just, check something into the public that you didn't mean to. And, we're all humans. We make mistakes. So, or again, you, by mistake, will check in a secret, right, that you shouldn't have. So, again, instead of just, telling people don't do this, we've built hooks. So at commit time, we can give you a warning that, look, you're about to do this. If you mean to do this, fine, go ahead. If not, it's just a little check. And people just appreciate that, right, our developers. So some data for you. Our top 10 practices that teams self-select. Remember, during a self-assessment, they select the practices that they're going to adopt. The number 1 is analysis for code you write. So this is either static or IAST. And what my team does is we'll purchase the tools, we'll integrate them into their development environments, we'll support them, we'll embed our security engineers in the teams till this becomes BAU, right? We want it to just take resistance out of the system. The second is working agreements. This was interesting that this was what teams picked as their second most. And working agreements is things like, I saw in the previous presentation a definition of done, right? So this is the team agreeing to things like, if we get to more than 5 high vulnerabilities, right, that we haven't fixed yet, in the next sprint, we're first going to work on that, right? So it's those kind of agreements that teams will come up with. The third biggest thing is analysis for code imported. And this is composition analysis. And this actually is almost more important with modern ways of developing, where you're just using open source and other components. And you need to figure out what they are, because guess what? The next big vulnerability is going to be in one of those, right? And you need to be able to see, how do I fix those? And so composition analysis is really important. The next is a tie for secrets management and yellow belt training. So, teams want to onboard to our secrets management platform. threat modeling is the next most adopted practice, and then pen testing, green belt, network-initiated scans, and then fuzzing. Fuzzing is hard to do. So we usually guide teams to not make that their first adopted practice, right? And here's the other, some numbers. Teams are signing up for an average of 2.5 goals. We actually ask them to just do 1 or 2 per quarter, right? So this is 1 or 2 new things per quarter. All but one of the teams so far has achieved all of their goals by the times that they're reassessed. Adoption is spreading. The top pluses we get back in terms of feedback are comments like this. Awesome, loved it. A very different approach that we expect from security. It was driven by team priorities, not by policy. Loved the bang for the buck, right? Those kind of comments are really, and then we also get, feedback for how we could improve. The first one was, wish our chart wasn't so red, so we switched to shades of green. Wish the self-assessment was online. They like doing the first one in person, but then they want to just be able to do, so we're building that, that's in progress. More on cloud and microservices. We're building a whole new set of tools around that. Make it easy to know who does what in security. Security organizations can be really confusing to deal with. So we've set up a whole catalog that describes all of the security services that are available to our developers. They want more gradual on-ramp. So when we first did Greenbelt, it was 40 hours of required work. And that's a lot for people to commit to. So we've now started to take out the most loved components of that into separate pieces, right? Then one of the most loved components is code bashing, with security coding, right? So that we've now taken out into a separate component. Faster tool onboarding, and then they hate jargon. So that's why we use things like security for code you build versus security for code you use, right? Because people were like, what the heck is IASD and SCA and so, and it just makes it easy. And we just say another pair of eyeballs instead of use this tool, this tool, this tool, this tool, and this tool, right? So I am right on time. I'm going to open it up for questions. Just to kind of wrap up about where we are, I would say about a third of our teams are working this way now. The rest are in various stages of adoption. And there are always pockets that haven't started the journey yet, right? So we'll probably never be 100%, but our goal is to be as close to 100% as possible. When I say a third of our teams, that means they're fully doing this kind of work, right? Everybody has to do the minimum required, right? Because we do have things that we have to be compliant with, right? So that's where I'm going to stop, and I think I'm going to open it up for questions as I bring up the browser with the Slido. All right. Any questions from the room? I'm between you and lunch, so yes.
How many people in your security practice?
I have a large security team. I have.
How do they broke it down in terms of segments?
So in this part, which what we call our product security and privacy part of the org, probably around 50-ish that work on this. And then on this particular, the people who do the tooling and go, that's a small team, 12 people. Yeah?
So you said you have some tools for preventing secrets and going into
Yeah.
is that like a tool in Git or something? And if that is, could you open source it?
We could. So we have multiple parts of it, and that's actually one of the things I'm talking. It's actually built on an open source tool, HashiCorp Vault, right? So it's built on that. Now, there are different levels of secrets as a service, but the most widely used is that one. But remember, we also have tons and tons of devices on our network, right? Like hundreds and thousands. And they need different ways of managing secrets, right? So we have that as well. But that HashiCorp Vault bit, we do want to make open source. Absolutely. Yeah. Other questions? All right, I have two here. We have several security scanning products. that take too long to execute. Yeah, so we really worked with our teams, and we really rejected a whole bunch of products because they don't work in that CI/CD environment, right? So right now, the ones that do work for us are Contrast, Coverity for Java, and but Contrast is really the one that we like the best, and it works in those very tight loops. They have actual IDE plugins, so as you're writing code, it's actually just flagging the most common security errors. And then the second was, how transparent are your security engineers with regards to security monitoring tools you use with your development teams? One of our operating principles is assume good intent. And we do. Most people do the right thing when given the chance. So we don't do a lot of heavy policing. We do monitor, and we will find occasionally a system without a tool, right? And then we go and work with that team. And almost always it is some impediment. It is something like, the question that, the first question is taking too long, or it's really hard to use, or I have to go through 10 steps to do it. And then we work with that team to try to remove that impediment. Right? Have you had situations where feature developed for a quarter was deemed more important by management than improving security goals for that quarter? Yes, this happens all the time. And, we have a conversation. And in some quarters, it's okay to say that, we've reached a certain level. The next quarter, we're going to focus on something else and come back. But that is a very rare occasion when, we get to that conclusion. Most of the time, every team is doing something to improve every quarter. Any more questions in the room, or I'll keep going? I think that's all that was here. Oh, how do you approach teams to onboard with the SDLC? Again, we start with that self-assessment process. It's really nothing more than that, a 2-hour session, where hour 1, we walk through the nifty 9 practices. It doesn't take long. Developers are super smart people. Hour 2, they do a self-assessment. The second time we'll do a self-assessment, they'll actually know more, and they're actually even harder on themselves. But that's how we do it. And then finally, what pointers do you have to gain executive sponsorship? Wow, that is a tough one. I actually don't have a good answer to this one. I am lucky because, I do work with a team that takes this very seriously, all the way from our board down. But I know I have worked previously in organizations where it's a constant fight, right, for funding, for resources, for balancing features versus. So I don't have a magic answer to this one at all. And I think that was it. If there is nothing else, then I think lunch is next. Thank you so much.